You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, and welcome back to another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson.
And of course, we have another interesting tale for you today. The actual place, it's called the Haunted House on the Hudson, and the house does still exist and was recently up for sale. It's an interesting story about, there are plenty of haunted houses in the world and many, many famous cases, Amityville Horror, etc. This particular story happens to be an old Victorian-style house on the Hudson River. If you keep driving past New York City away from the blaring lights and sounds, you'll drive past a small town called Nyack, New York. There at the end of the listless cul-de-sac stands a two-story rambling affair at the edge of the Hudson River inside a dark history hides in its walls. The house on One La Vita Place has been a boarding house and a private residence since it was built in the early 1900s when a couple named George and Helen Ackley moved into the house in the early 1960s. Stories began to circulate around the town of strange goings-on inside and otherworldly stories from the Ackleys themselves. Now, the Ackleys shared the house with their children and grandchildren and have been reporting to the neighbors phantom footsteps, knockings, doors opening and slamming, beds shaking violently with no possible explanation. And a decade later, the family decided to write about their experiences, and their article appeared in the May 1977 edition of Reader's Digest.
I didn't think that was Reader's Digest material.
I didn't think so either, but there's some weird things in Reader's Digest sometimes. In an article titled Our Haunted House on the Hudson, the family described their decade-long life amongst the three benevolent spirits they claimed resided at One La Vita Place. He was sitting in midair watching me paint the ceilings in the living room, rocking back and forth, she said. I was on an 8-foot stepladder. I asked if he approved of what we were doing in the house. If the color was to his liking, he smiled and nodded his head. Mrs. Ackley said one of the other ghosts would waltz into her daughter's bedroom. We don't know whether or not she was the one who woke the children up by shaking the bed. Ghost number 3 was a Navy lieutenant during the American Revolution. My son saw him eyeball to eyeball outside the basement door, Mrs. Ackley told the New York Times. Now, the Ackleys claimed that the spirits would often gift them strange items that would suddenly appear throughout the house. A man who married into the Ackley family wrote about his knowledge of the paranormal activity in an article titled Ghost of Nyack, background about the house. The story deals with the house that my wife, Cynthia, spent her teen years in. The house is situated on the Hudson River at the bottom of the dead-end street. It was a 5,000 square foot Victorian house with 3 levels plus a full basement and attic. Now, Cynthia's parents, Helen and George Ackley, bought the house in the late 1960s. At the time, the big Victorian sat vacant and was in disrepair. Neighborhood kids told them as they moved in that the house was haunted. It wasn't until later that the Ackleys found the truth. The ghosts and the Ackleys live in peace with each other. There never was an intentional scare to any of the Ackleys or other visitors. Nyack sits approximately 20 miles north of New York City on the west bank of the Hudson. Many people in the area know about the haunting of this house. As a matter of fact, the Hudson Valley is known for many haunted places.
It's true, it is. Yeah.
It is. Just across the river in Tarrytown is the legendary Sleepy Hollow. This was made famous by the Washington Irving's Halloween tale of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, yeah.
And many of Irving's tales are based on the legends of Lower Hudson Valley. It's funny that Sleepy Hollow, it isn't really called Sleepy Hollow, that was the fictional name, but Tarrytown is the actual town he based it on. The big bridge that happens with the Headless Horseman is literally 3 times the length of this table. That's how long the bridge is.
Okay.
And it's 2 lanes for 2 cars. That's how wide it is. And it's literally a tiny little bridge over a creek. It's not a river.
I heard it was a tiny little bridge there. Yeah.
It's really small. And actually, there's a marker on it in Tarrytown that says, this is the Sleepy Hollow Bridge, because that was the bridge he based it on. It used to be an old wooden bridge.
Right.
It was replaced by, obviously, concrete later.
Right.
But you can actually see it. You can go in the cemetery, which is close by, but you can actually go across the Sleepy Hollow Bridge, but you don't blink. The legend of the Nyack house made print in the Reader's Digest by an article submitted by Helen Ackley herself in May of 1977 edition. She told of the various instances about the ghosts making their presence known to the family. She said, one ghost would wake my wife up every morning for school by shaking her bed. When spring broke, my wife made a loud announcement before going to sleep that it was spring break. There was no school and she wanted to sleep in. Her bed did not shake the next morning. So they're respectful of her sleep, apparently.
Well, yeah, but shaking you every morning for school, that would be too invasive. I'm sorry.
Who needs an alarm clock?
Right.
A few of the grandchildren received gifts from the ghosts in the form of baby rings. All of them suddenly just disappeared.
Where did they find them?
I have no idea. My wife received a gift of a small silver sugar tong. My wife's older brother, his wife, received coins. Now, while painting the living room, Helen saw one of the ghosts looking up in approval of the color, and that's where she asked if he approved of the color, and he said yes. He said, I had 2 personal experiences with the ghosts. They both happened soon after I moved in with my future wife, Cynthia, and it occurred about 1 month apart. The first happened on Christmas Eve. I was home alone due to various activities. I was playing Christmas elf in the living room, putting together gifts. It was totally quiet in the house. After a while, I kept hearing a muffled conversation coming from the dining room around the wall. I got up, walked over. Nobody was there. I felt like I was being watched. I had purposely turned on every light in the living room or in the surrounding rooms. I was getting kind of nervous, and then my future brother-in-law suddenly pounded on the door, making me jump out of my skin, and the talking stopped. The second incident happened in our bedroom on the 3rd floor. It was a clear, dark night. Cynthia had already fallen asleep, and I was drifting. Then I heard the bedroom door creak and the floorboards squeak. My back was to the edge of the bed. Suddenly, the edge of the bed by my midsection pressed down, and I felt something lean against me. I went literally stone stiff. I was speechless. I could hardly move. I was able to twist my back around enough to see a womanly figure in a soft dress through the moonlight from the bay windows. I felt like she was looking straight at me. After about a minute, the presence got up and walked back out of the room. I finally relaxed enough to shake my wife out of sound sleep, acting like a toddler who had just had a nightmare.
That's, wow. So she was, well...
Sitting on the bed.
Sitting on the bed,
looking
yeah.
At him.
Looking at him.
Now, whatever you want to believe about the haunted house on Hudson, the story is mostly famous for sparking the infamous Ghostbusters ruling from the Applegate Court of New York in the trial of Stambowski versus Ackley. The court held, whereas here the seller not only takes unfair advantage of the buyer's ignorance, but has created and perpetrated a condition about which he is unlikely to even inquire, enforcement of the contract in whole or in part is offensive to the court's sense of equity. Application of remedy of rescission within the bounds of narrow exception to the doctrine of cavit emptor set forth herein is entirely appropriate to relieve the unwitting purchaser from the consequence of a most unnatural bargain. Now, when the house was put on market, the Stambowskis fought to keep their $32,500 deposit after they learned about the house's paranormal history a bit too late. The Ackleys and the realtor were found to be at fault for not disclosing the ghoulish details about the unwanted amenities. Now, what's interesting is that this house literally was for sale like 2 months ago.
Oh, it was?
It
Okay.
was back on the market and actually was purchased by a couple who were restoring it. Mm-hmm. Really putting money into restoring
And
the
they knew
house.
about the case, or?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They love that it has a history.
But
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 they
it's
wanted
not,
to rescue the Victorian and restore
but
it.
it's not a sinister history like another like other cases. This
Yeah.
is it's more friendly, but it's just but not everybody would take kindly to a house of paranormal history though.
Exactly. You're coexisting with a spirit. Now,
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever had to coexist with a spirit in your house before.
Oh yes.
You realize it's not vengeful to you, but you're able to exist in your house with it. You're able to coexist.
Right.
Some people have these experiences in their houses, so much so that they have names for the entities or spirits that live in their house. I hear that a lot.
Now, are they required by law to tell the purchasers about this
You know,
in the New York State?
I don't think.
Because I know some states they are.
Well, I know you're not supposed to. You don't have to by law tell of a haunting. You have to tell if somebody died in the house.
Oh, okay. Well, that would make sense.
And that's only in certain states. California for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if it is in New York. And this article implies that, by law they were supposed to. I don't think so. If you say, yeah, there's been ghostly experiences in this house, by the way, maybe you should know. You can't prove or disprove that. So you can't tell them that you're lying or you didn't tell me. How do you prove that?
Yeah. Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No,
Whereas
I get
if
you.
somebody died, you could actually prove by record somebody died in this house.
Right, and I would want to know if somebody died in the house that I'm purchasing. Yeah.
I think, I would. I would like to know just the whole history of the house, whether who died in it.
That's
how.
true. Well, the whole history, yeah.
Yeah, but some people don't want to know. Mm-hmm. But then if something happens, they freak out and say, "Why didn't you tell me my house was haunted? Somebody died."
And if the house had a famous history, a violent history, definitely you should know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like a murder, like the DeFeo house through
Right.
Amityville. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
8 murders?
Or the house in
Murders?
Sacramento.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Dorothy Puente murder house.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's hard not to miss.
That's hard not to tell, yeah.
But again, unless years pass and the realtor doesn't tell you, or maybe the realtor gets handed the house and says, "Here, sell this," and isn't aware of the deaths.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not in a file and you don't reveal it, especially in California, that you broke the law. Mm-hmm. But as far as a ghost story, it's kind of hearsay. Because paranormal experiences are very personal.
Yes.
And they're not always continuous. They're not on command. One person may never experience something, whereas the tenant before them experienced everything.
And who's to say that the buyer's going to believe it anyway? A lot of people just don't believe it. They just say, "Oh, I've heard about that. I don't believe that," and they'll just purchase the house. They don't care.
And that happened to the Amityville house.
Yeah.
After they sold it. Mm-hmm. There's people who lived there for, I think, 2.5 decades and never had an experience.
Never had a problem.
Ever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
Who's to say?
are they looking for experience? Are they looking for the publicity?
Mm-hmm.
You never know. I mean, I've always told you this: if I had the money to buy the Amityville house, I would buy it exclusively for paranormal investigation, to let people decide for themselves whether they believe the house actually has anything there.
But you wouldn't actually live in it, but you would probably keep it up and just use it.
You would keep it up, but whether the neighbors would appreciate you having all those groups come in, but they do have neighborhood ordinances and stuff. They did change the address so people couldn't looky-loo and park outside. How would you like that if you had a house that had a history and people would looky-loo at your house?
Well, that's true. And a lot of houses have real estate records that you can look up publicly, but I'm sure a house as famous as that probably would keep the records more private. Maybe. I don't know.
But you would have to, if it's public record, there's probably going to be articles that you can find.
Sure.
Especially on the internet now. People can do their own research to find out if that address had any murders at it, or, any killings or anything traumatic.
Sure.
Whereas back in the day, it'd be a lot harder to find.
Back in that time, yeah. But this house seems like it has a history, but a friendly history, not necessarily a history of spirits that are that are bothersome or troublesome.
What's interesting is the one Navy lieutenant during the American Revolution, because that's on the Hudson. The American Revolution is all over there.
Oh, yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that the son would have an experience with that Navy lieutenant ghost in the basement.
Right.
Because there's soldiers all over there. I mean, all the way through history, the Hudson has been the dividing line.
Yeah.
With, battling the British when they came to the American settlers.
Uh-huh.
The battle was right there.
Right,
the
right.
Revolution was right on the Hudson Bay, and the Hudson in general is right. I mean, all of those areas are just. I'm sure there's tons of ghost stories.
Oh yeah.
Along the Hudson
around there,
itself.
yeah.
But I thought this was an interesting house. I saw it for sale. And I thought, oh, I'd love to buy that house. It's a Victorian. It's the right size that I would want.
Oh, I'm sure it's nice.
Right by the water.
Yeah.
So
nice area, yeah.
Absolutely, I would love that. But it gets really cold and it gets really hot, but still, it would be nice to have.
I'd like to hear from people who live around that area who have their own ghost stories and who knows about that house.
It'd actually be fun to dig deeper about other Hudson River stories.
Sure.
That we
Oh,
could
yeah.
find. Maybe
I'm
we
sure
could
there
find
are
more later
others.
on. Do some more episodes on the Hudson.
Oh,
area.
yeah. Well, that's
It's interesting. Though.
It's interesting, and as I mentioned, I never expected Reader's Digest to have a story like that.
I know.
Yeah, and I'd like to hear about other stories of that area.
Exactly. I wonder if Fate Magazine ever did a story on this. They might have.
Oh, they might have. They've done so many.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's possible. Mm-hmm. All right, folks. That's another episode.
Yeah.
And we will see you again next time.
Yeah. See you next time. Bye.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.